going on up your way?
Um, Not much at the moment. Well, not much, but a lot at the same time. I've got family over for Christmas, and that, as it always does, brings a lot of not responsibility, but just committing time, making arrangements. My brother's visiting, so I'm just showing him the city. So busy, just finished up work for the year, which is nice. Um, but keeping on top of everything. So
Yeah, I
it's all
get it,
good.
man. It's a funny time of the year. It's interesting. Where's your brother from? Oh, he's living over in, is it Denmark or am I making that up?
He's living over in Amsterdam.
Amsterdam. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah,
So he's just
yeah,
back for the Christmas break, eh?
yeah. You just come to visit.
Awesome, man. What do you got planned with the family for the next couple of weeks?
So my mom's really into Christmas. She loves doing, well, I guess the whole family is, but I think her in particular, she really drives it all. So we're doing, a big Christmas day with full lunch and roast, just various roast meats. And really just spending with the family. That's kind of what we do every year, just family time. But a lot of food and a lot of preparation.
Yeah, you do Christmas right.
Planning planning gifts very, very carefully so that no one feels left out or hard done by.
That's a good way
So
to
it's
do it. That's a good way to
every
do it.
year.
We have
Yeah.
like a limit on the amount that we're allowed to spend on our presents. So we say, all right, no more than like 25 bucks each, because otherwise, I'll end up going hard on my mum and forgetting to buy my dad a present. It just gets
Yeah.
uncomfortable for everyone. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the way to
yeah.
do it. I mean, I think there should be, yeah, you do need those kind of rules in place. I think the more structure, the better with
I
Christmas buying, else it gets out of control.
It's so true, man. It's so true, dude. Before we properly get started, I wanted to talk to you because last time I saw you was last Thursday night.
Mm.
Dude, that was a we were both down at Bobby Peel's doing some open mic comedy. Thank God you left before I got up on stage.
All
But
right.
dude, that was a tough little gig that night, wasn't it? There's
Yeah.
nothing pretty about being up in front of a room full of comedians.
No, it's hard. I was saying to someone after that gig, being going up in front of a room of comedians, it's nerve-wracking, first of all, because you know that everyone is gonna judge you straight away because they're comedians, you're a comedian, they know that you think you're funny, and they think they're funny, so they're really judging your jokes quite harshly before you even start. And then on top of that, they're probably thinking about their own sets and what they're going to say up on stage. So they're nervous. They're not really concentrating on the jokes. So it's difficult to make them laugh. But if you do make a room of comedians laugh, it's, I'd say, one of the better feelings because then you know you've really got a good joke if you can make that room crack.
See, that's a way
Um,
better attitude than I have about it because I was there last week and I was like, this is such a waste of time. No one wants to be here. I don't want to be here. And it was funny because I had a set list in my mind. I was like, all right, I'm going to get up. And I had the jokes. And about 5 minutes before I got up, I was like, stuff it. I'm doing all brand new stuff. And I've learned that so many times that is just the one way that you don't do comedy because like the jokes I ended up doing, it was literally stuff I'd never even put pen to paper on to try and navigate my way through. I was like
yeah,
trying to formulate what a punchline might be about 2 minutes before I got up on stage. And I got up on stage, and there was a lot of blank faces, and I was like, oh,
yeah,
I really need to learn this lesson and start
yeah.
putting in a little bit of preparation. It's funny, it's a completely different attitude in a room. Like when I'm in front of a room full of people who I know are there to watch comedy, I'm like, all right,
Mm,
for whatever reason, I'm just inspired to do it. But I always find it hard. Like
mm,
your
mm.
attitude that you just explained then makes so much more sense, or at least inspires so much more to go, all right, if I can make this audience laugh, then I'm on
Yeah.
to a winner. Cause I'm always like, oh, well, there's no point even trying to make these guys laugh because we're all just waiting for our shot.
That the mental kind of process that you go through, or mental journey that you go through before a gig like that, or any gig really, it's always so turbulent. I have the same thing. If I if I'm waiting to go on stage and I got a feeling like the gig is going to be a bad gig, I'll definitely have that. the thought of like, I'm just going to leave. Like, I'm going to pull out. Like, there's no point in me doing this. It's a waste of time. Like, shouldn't have come, or it's just going to be a miserable time. And I think that what I try and do is just push myself to get on. Like, because I figure that if I can do those gigs, those really, really uncomfortable gigs, then I can be comfortable at almost any gig. But that you have so many thoughts that come in, so many thoughts that like well up and brew up, and you're just like, I've got to leave, I got to get out of here, I just can't do this, I can't. And to kind of settle that storm or get on top of your thoughts it's really, really hard in that context. And you do start to pull back. In fact, I was reading something a while back about doing something that's important but really stressful. A psychologist wrote an article on it, and they were saying that one of the like a key sign that you're doing something stressful, or one of the reactions to doing something really stressful, is just pulling back and kind of saying, well, I don't want to do this. Like, it's not worth it. I don't see any value in it, and I'm just gonna pull out. There's no point. You essentially just give up, and it's kind of a defense mechanism against the stress. It's your body kind of retracting, trying to protect you from the stress of it. It's really, really hard. Something that I do to help me get through that is just appreciate how silly the whole situation is. Like, I think about often when you watch interviews with comedians or you listen to interviews with comedians, they'll always go through the kind of when they first started out in comedy and they were doing open mics and they used to bum at all these small bars wherever they performed. And they often retell it in a way that's comical. Like, oh yeah, there used to be like 3 people in the audience, and like, oh, like comedian Mike was there and he used to do that kind of material. And they always talk about it in a kind of sentimental and nostalgic way. Whenever I'm at a gig like we were on a Thursday, I kind of look around the room and I just think, how silly is this whole thing that it's like we're here on a Thursday evening in this room upstairs that no one knows about. There's like a room of like essentially just 15 guys, maybe like 1 woman. We're all going to get up. Probably 80% of the jokes are going to be dick jokes, and then we're all going to leave. Like, it's just a really, really sad situation. And I kind of think, like, in a few years' time, like, no matter where I'm at in comedy, or if I'm still doing comedy, like, those nights or these nights will kind of be the nights that I look back on and think, like, oh man, they were just so funny. Like, you can't. Those are the nights that you do remember, and they're painful at the time. But I kind of try and remind myself that in a few years' time, they won't really matter, and there'll be something kind of almost beautiful.
Yeah, man, honestly, it's such a good attitude to have about the stand-up scene, because I think I do something fairly similar with you. I definitely find comfort in the fact, after a bad bomb, going back and listening to some of the best comedians in the world talk about exactly what you just spoke about then, and about how it sort of just blends into this big, beautiful journey towards where they are now. And it's a nice reminder to hear these guys and go, okay, well, not even the best of these guys are bulletproof. It's kind of a bomb your way to the top kind of industry, sure. Really, isn't it? And it's but it's such a humbling way to find your feet in front of a room full of people who are embarrassed to be sitting there while you're on stage trying to navigate your way through some bullshit material that just is not funny yet. And it is really it is funny. If you can always think, if I can separate the emotion from the experience that I have, like so Thursday night, I left that room, and for me, the hardest part is to listen back to a tape like that, where you're going to hear your so-called punchlines and then just complete silence. And it's cringy when you're on stage, but it's even cringier when you get off and you're in the car by yourself trying to figure it all out. And But for me, like just trying to separate the emotion from that and go, okay, like on a practical level, like what are some takeaways? Okay, well, it was a room full of comedians. It was very rusty material. It was quite green, and just try, because there's so many elements that make comedy or stand-up comedy work. Like I'm sure you've had this experience where I'll go to a room like that and I'll try something new, or I'll try a joke that I've been working at for a while that I know or that I think is funny and the audience has given a positive response to, in another occasion. And then you take that to a room with a slightly different energy. People might be having a bit more of a downer of a night. And for whatever reason, it just falls so flat. So trying to navigate what's a good joke and what's a rubbish joke, it's not just as easy as like, all right, is it funny or is it not? There's a whole range of elements. And those nights where you're going to a room and for whatever reason, everyone's just on, and you'll say something that's not that funny, and it'll just bring the house down. So it's a really strange scene that I love trying to navigate. And like this kind of stuff is part of the reason I wanted to talk to you today, because like we've only met a few times really, but the conversations I've had with you before gigs are not even necessarily or very little to do with comedy most of the time. And I went home and spoke to my wife about you, and I was saying, I met this bloke Nathan. He's got this. I love your perspective, and I'm fascinated by what you do outside of comedy as much as I am by what you're doing in the comedy scene. And man, I guess as a little bit of a way of introduction into that, you're a man of many talents, really. But I was fascinated to hear how you explain to people what it is that you do, like with particular relation to your studies.
Yeah. So what we spoke about the other night, it was really, I finished studying last year. I completed my honors degree in sociology and anthropology, which is often not necessarily a misunderstood degree. Sometimes it is misunderstood, but I don't think it's really understood. People don't necessarily understand what anthropology is or what sociology is, and what it entails. A lot of people assume it's something to do with kind of prehistoric studying of fossils or ancient civilizations. And there might be some of that, but in the mainstay, it's not that at all. So anthropology is the study of culture. So basically, historically transmitted ideas and beliefs that are commonly shared by a group. And those beliefs and ideas then inform our practices and shape the way that we see ourselves and the world. So we anthropologists are studying worldviews, how people understand the world. Like a good way that I had it put to me by someone who's doing their PhD in anthropology. He said that, like a dining room table, you can analyze that kind of scientifically or quantitatively by like unpicking the materials and looking into the particles and breaking down the very fibers of the table and trying to understand it that way. But that's not how everyday humans understand a wooden table. We attach meaning to objects. A table in your grandmother's dining room might have some real significance to you. It might have, your whole family might have sat there at one point in time and shared special memories around that table. So for you, that dining room table means so much more than just the actual particles of the wood that make up the table. So as anthropologists, or even sociologists, our job is really to try and understand or listen to how people conceive of the world or how they understand their everyday life. Mm-hmm. And the things that they take for granted, or the things that seem common sense to them, like norms that they don't think about, but have such a large influence on how they conduct themselves. So we do in-depth interviews. We do what we call participant observation. So like with comedy, an anthropologist would go to a comedy room, say like an open mic room, and they wanted to do a project on open mic comedians in Melbourne. They would go there, sit in the room, take observations, write down notes, what we call field notes, and then they would conduct interviews. You know, they could be lengthy interviews or they could be fairly short. Generally, anthropology tends towards more long and in-depth interviews. Sociology, maybe more kind of survey data. But our role is to try and understand why comedians are partaking in comedy, why they want to do open mic comedy, what's kind of motivating them, what are the norms, what are the kind of social mistakes you can make in a comedy room. Or you can look at like the economy of open mic rooms. There's so many different ways you could look at a group or a culture. So that's what anthropology is, and that's kind of what I've been involved in for the past 4 years.
Yeah, see, this is fascinating to me because the conversation I had with you just a couple of weeks ago was the first time I'd really heard much about anthropology. So I'm hoping there's a lot of beginners who are in the same boat as me listening to this, because you're going to get a lot of beginner questions. But it's a fascinating idea of just that observation idea of going in and trying to understand, you know, what it is that's trying to be achieved or why it is we believe the things we believe. Like, I understand it's a broad and deep scope in terms of the, I guess everything's included in the study of anthropology, really, or is it the study of sort of a human understanding of whatever it is that they're participating in? I'm trying to get my head around it.
It can be anything. It can be anything. I've heard about a study. There was a classmate of mine who wanted to do a study on toenails. Wanted to look at toenails. People look at stuff like colors, perception of colors. You could do tattoos, or you could even do objects. Some people do the anthropology of objects. Look at how, say, something like cobalt that is in iPhones travel across the globe, how they mind, what kind of process they go through, and what their engagement's like, or what contact they have with humans, and then study the kind of economies around cobalt.
What is it? What's cobalt?
Cobalt is like it's a material that's used to make part of iPhones. Like they use it in the batteries and the components of iPhones. It's just like I'm not too sure exactly. It's like, I think it's a kind of a metal. I'm not too sure, but it's mined mainly in Central Africa. Cobalt. So yeah, anthropology, they would say, is such a broad church. It can encase so many topics. It's not so much a topic, but more a method of study, if that makes sense. So it's just it's a method of study that you can apply to almost any area of interest.
And are you trying to get to a particular outcome, or is it different for everything that you're looking at? Like when I guess the outcome of going to study a comedian is going to be different to the outcome of studying a toenail. But like when you start that project, or when you start that field of study, are you going, all right, well, I'm trying to understand what it is that a comedian's trying to get out of this? Like, is there sort of like a common consensus on what you guys are trying to achieve with your study?
There is a common concept, a fairly common consensus. The kind of goal of anthropology, the reason why anthropologists still push for it and still think it's valuable, is the goal is to really provide a deep understanding. So ethnographic methods is what we use, or ethnography is basically writing like an in-depth study of something. So traditionally, ethnographers and anthropologists, and this actually started, unfortunately, in the colonial period when colonizers wanted to understand in kind of indigenous communities and the way that they, structured their economies or kind of social riches, and it was a ritual. Sorry, they used anthropologists, or anthropologists didn't even really exist then. They took other scholars to study these societies so that they could control them. If they could understand the indigenous people, then they knew how to, control them in the colonial project. But now the project of anthropology is really to provide knowledge that is in depth, it's particular, it's nuanced, it provides complexity. So if you think about the kind of antithesis of that, it's very much some fields like, I don't want to bag on other disciplines, but something like economics, for example. I know there's a lot of data harvesting going on in economics, but traditionally economists have made broad generalizations about populations and the way that populations behave. And what they'll do is they'll gather that knowledge by collecting data, so like survey data. So, you get something like the census is maybe a good example of this. It's like you get a survey and they ask you like, okay, what is your income, or a personality test, like are you extroverted, and so on. And then they make certain assessments and judgments based on that data. They say, okay, well, Tyson lives in this demographic and he's this age and this sex, therefore he might behave like this. Anthropology kind of says that that's an inadequate way to study humans and human behavior. It might be adequate, but it's not sufficient. So it's like, it's good, but maybe not good enough. So what we try and do is we actually try and speak to people. So we'll go to, if I wanted to do a study on you and the area you live in, say we want to conduct research on home ownership, and they want to create policies around home ownership. Anthropologists and sociologists would say, well, we need to go and speak to people in this demographic. We need to actually find out what's going on in their lives, why, maybe why they're struggling to repay their home loans. So we would then ask you a series of questions. For my honors project, which is a relatively small project, I had 8 hours worth of interviews. So, and I was only interviewing 4 people.
Wow.
So 2 interviews with people, and you're trying to find out basically, what's going on in their life. What are all the different factors that are playing into this one phenomenon that you are studying. So say we're looking at home loan repayments, and this particular demographic is not paying their home loans. Other disciplines might make assumptions. They say, well, okay, it might be because, I don't know, men who are in their 30s are lazy and therefore they don't pay their home loans back. Anthropologists our goal is to really go in and find out what's the real story. So it's kind of like journalism, but it's more rigorous and more serious, and you are meant to spend a long time with people. Anthropologists, especially of old, and now as well, if you do a PhD, you have to spend years with your research participants. So it's not about them just going in and taking a survey. It's about going there, living with them, seeing how they conduct their lives, how they understand the world. You essentially are trying to get inside their worldview until their actions and their beliefs make complete sense.
Mm.
So like an example, this is a great example, is there was a couple who were both anthropologists. They went to, I can't remember the community's name. I think it was somewhere kind of in New Guinea. I could be wrong, but they went there and they were studying the phenomenon of headhunting. So that's where if someone's in this community, if someone lost a family member or their spouse, if a man lost their wife, that man would go out and chop someone else's head off, kill someone else, which seems crazy, right? You're like, okay, well, that's wild, like it's unethical, why would you do that? It's not necessary, it's unjustified, and so on. So this couple, they went to this community and lived amongst this community for a long, long time. And they write about their experience and like how they felt towards the phenomenon of headhunting. And they were initially just opposed to it and kind of had that position of like, this doesn't make any sense. And the husband was like, I can't understand why you would do this. And the community was saying like, no, it's for us, the death of someone is so tragic that you get so angry that the only way that you can release the anger is to take the life of someone else. And the anthropologist was like, okay, I get that, but that's still crazy. And while they were on the trip, the anthropologists, the couple, were exploring the area, and they were they're climbing around a mountain, and the wife slipped and fell and died. She slipped and fell down the mountain and died. And the husband said that when his wife died, he finally understood why. He finally understood the anger that you feel when someone close to you dies like that. And he said he'd been living with the community for so long that he actually had the urge to just go out and headhunt.
Gee.
And it finally clicked in his mind. And that's kind of what anthropologists are aiming to do. So it's kind of like, we want to go into a community or a group, understand what's going on in their world, understand their actions and their beliefs, and then report back on that in a way that's complex, it's nuanced. It provides a full and holistic story.
Yeah, man, that's it's interesting. You've said the word nuanced a couple of times now, and I think for me, like our first good conversation, I would say it's probably our second conversation ever. Was at Bobby Peel's about an hour before the show, and that was one thing that really stood out to me about you. And I was wondering during the conversation, I was like, man, this guy he seems very unemotional or emotionally disconnected to a lot of the ideas that he's speaking about, which to me, it gave me the impression that you were speaking a lot more calmly, a lot more rationally, that you didn't seem like you were necessarily married to any of the ideas that we were talking about. And we were talking about some heavy stuff like COVID and the opinions on COVID and the death rate in South Africa, your homeland. And I thought, man, it'd be quite easy to be a bloke in your situation speaking about this stuff and just trying to convert me to whatever it is that you like, to whatever way you see this particular idea. And man, just through that last few minutes of you speaking, I realized how lazy I am with so many of the interpretations or understandings of everything that I have is because the idea of actually using the example that you just gave, like immersing yourself in a culture to such a point where you understand something which is not only foreign, but sort of sounds absurd is like, what a beautiful way to develop an understanding of anything. And I was really curious to pick your brain about, because I don't think I'm necessarily out there on my own when I say I'm a very lazy thinker, and you only have to log on to Facebook for 10 minutes to see that we're all trying to convert each other to see the world the way we see it. which I'm sure is based on more than just facts, but emotions and the people we surround ourselves with and the people that whose research we're looking at. And, I'm sure there's another 1,000 other things that I'm probably missing just to use this example. But like from your perspective, first of all, I was interested to hear you talk on the idea of that not necessarily, or at least the illusion that you're not married to your ideas. You seem to paint that really nicely. And second of all, like I can only imagine how frustrating it must be for a person who's trained in this field to see so many of the lazy kind of thinking errors that so many people in our culture make.
So yeah, I think that it's in regards to your first question, not being married to your ideas, that is hard. I think I am still married to a few of my ideas. I'm not like absolved of that entirely. But something like anthropology, it gives you the insight that the way you conceive of the world is only one way amongst multitude of ways to see the world. And you kind of start to treat your own perspective with a certain degree of suspicion. It's like, well, I am thinking about the world in this way, but I know from previous experience or previous learning that it might not necessarily be true. You kind of always have a certain degree of critical distance. I mean, not always. I think I still get pulled. That's the thing with culture. It's so ingrained in our everyday lives and the way that we see the world that you can't feel it. It's like a fish swimming in water. You can't. Fish has no concept of the water around it. So to say that you're kind of free of that, or you can kind of distance yourself from everything, is too big a claim. But to not be married to your ideas, it's really important. And to kind of, for me, it's really about critical thinking, and that's a skill that needs to be trained. Like before university, I mean, everyone has some degree of critical thinking, but before university, I didn't have it nearly as much. And you really need to go through quite intensive training to be able to look at data or information and make an assessment, what we say like a rational assessment, or the best possible assessment you can make. And that in a degree will, especially like an arts or social science degree, will teach you you're doing that all the time. You're assessing, you're answering questions. So they give you a question and then you have to find evidence to form your position, and have to assess so many other people's claims. So that's something that is definitely trained and practiced, like anything. Like comedy, that kind of thinking doesn't just come. It really has to be practiced and kept up. And then in regards to your second question, how I perceive other people, I mean, I think that there is a lot of, I mean, I wouldn't like to use the word lazy, because I feel like it's kind of putting the responsibility on the individual to critically think. And I think that there is some responsibility that people have to take. But having studied sociology, you realize that people are, to some degree, a large product of the structures and the systems that they find themselves in. So I think, education and like a robust education system is so integral to showing that a population has that ability to think decisively and clearly. And I kind of, if I was going to point fingers, I'd really point my fingers at education system, because I do think that it's really, really important now, like as we've seen over, past 5 years, even more, just the kind of lack of, increasing political polarization, but also just lack of substantial communication around global political issues or even regional political matters. It just seems to, people can't quite seem to agree with each other. And I think that comes down to, one, being able to communicate and articulate yourself in a way that makes sense. But also just kind of detaching yourself from certain positions and certain ways of seeing the world.
It's interesting you pointed to the education system as a place that we probably need to hold. I don't know, these are my words, not yours, but hold a little bit accountable to the idea that there's a lot of polarization. I say that because I don't think, like, in my whole school life, I went all the way through from prep to high school, 4 years of uni, and I don't think any place through there I was taught anything about thinking rationally or helpful ways to break down difficult ideas, or the idea of just being open to other people's ideas and like him or love him or somewhere in between. I was at a school last year doing a little bit of work, and a kid got told off because he was a year 6 kid and they had to do a project on someone they idolized. And he chose to do Donald Trump because he wanted to be a successful businessman. And I remember hearing the teacher sort of smack him down, essentially going like, this is disgusting. This guy's and I know it's a controversial example for a lot of people, but the guy's the president of the United States. Like, there's obviously a little bit we can glean from him, even underneath, his bumps and the things that we don't like about him. But I thought that was interesting, and rather than just having a conversation with a kid about, what it is that the teacher obviously didn't like. And it seemed, using this nuanced conversation that you're speaking to me about, it seemed like a missed opportunity to be able to actually, come to a point of, if not agreement, just understanding on, what this kid admired about him, like the differences, because chances are probably the things that the teacher didn't like about him, there's a good chance in many respects the kid probably didn't like either. But I know that even with my mum, I'm down here in Gippsland at the moment, and a number of things that we might have a disagreement on, and it's so easy to get caught up on the one thing that you disagree with rather than the 15 things you have in common. And exactly, I know for myself, I'm really trying to work through that at the moment, especially through this COVID period. Is I've been so set on my particular view of events, and I've been getting frustrated at people who disagree with it. And why don't you just see it like me? And then it doesn't take long to realize that the people on the complete opposite side of the fence are looking at me the exact same way and going, "Oh, Tice, like, why are you so closed-minded?" And I thought, okay, surely it can't be that just everyone who disagrees with me is just a complete idiot. There's a good chance I'm the idiot. But it's I feel as though there's many missed opportunities. And the idea of, to go back to my original point of school or education being a chance to develop your ability to think critically, there's definitely plenty of room for improvement there. But like, using that as an example, what kind of things would you say, with the knowledge that you have in the field that you're in now, like what would have been helpful sort of foundational tools for you to have learned at a younger age to, just give you a little bit of a platform to continue learning this stuff from?
Yeah, I think that I think the critical part of coming to a place of understanding is the realization or the understanding of difference. So often schools, I wasn't educated in Australia, so I'm only speaking from my school experience. Well, I was university educated here, but schools don't provide you with a rich understanding of how things are different elsewhere. As in, they don't give you an extremely good understanding of how things are different historically. So they give you, say, like in history, I've spoken to a few students here, they teach you about the Anzacs and, like the wartime heroes and so on. So the first one is history. There's so much in history that is rich and provides a interesting lens for which we can understand the world. So, for example, like in ancient Greece, it was common and encouraged for a man to cry in public, especially. To show emotion in that way was something that was, one, regarded as normal, and two, not celebrated, but valued.
Mm.
And he was kind of regarded as, heroic or courageous for doing that. I mean, if you think about it now, if a man had to cry in public now, it just become viewed completely differently. But even that little fact changes your perception of the act of crying as a man. So historically, if you think about the indigenous cultures in Australia, there's just so much there that we can learn from and use to be able to view our lives in a different way, but then obviously cross-culturally. So really trying to hone and establish the understanding in kids from a young age that they are not just, it's not just us. We're not just in Australia and that is our world, and we have this small history. There are other communities that exist outside of us, one, but two, that those communities are rich, diverse, and complex. And within that complexity and diversity, there is similarities to the way that we understand the world. So that understanding, I think, is a good starting position for compassion and empathy. Because when you meet someone who, say, is now politically opposed, I can disagree with their fundamental ideas, but I know that they're not necessarily just going to be like inhuman, or they're just completely apathetic or a sociopath. That there's something behind them, or there's something within their lives that is driving and motivating them to say and do the things that they do. That they are kind of caught within a larger structures that are affecting their lives in a particular way. And that's important. I think, like, the kind of understanding of nowadays is like, well, those people believe X, and that's because they are Y. I don't know. They like this thing, or they're ignorant, whatever it might be. And that's kind of where it stops. And that only gets you so far, because you'll continue to butt heads with that person. But a degree like anthropology and sociology, like sociology looking more at structures, so like kind of systems, like societal, like kind of broader economic structures, like how something like the economy going through an economic slowdown would affect certain sectors, what impact that has on people's livelihoods and their lives at home, and so on. So if I think now when someone greets me with like, oh, I believe this, and it's opposed to my view, I kind of have a sense that, well, there's more at play than them just being an idiot or stupid. They live within the system. They have their own personal history, which is in the context of a broader history. And all those factors make them who they are and have resulted in them having that political viewpoint. And I think maybe I'm wrong wrong for doing this, but I kind of assume the better in people. I assume that there's good in people more often than not. And I think that a lot of tension and stress is a result of pain. Or a lot of anger is a result of stress. So I kind of, if someone confronts me with anger or very strong and stubborn view, I kind of think, well, what else is going on there? You know, they're most likely going through stress. They most likely have grown up in a context where that was a normal view. There has to be more in my mind, and you can find that out with questions. Instead of kind of confronting them straight on and opposing them and saying like, okay, well, that's like stupid, like you're stupid.
That's my approach usually in those conversations. Yeah. Probably the reason I wanted to talk to you so much. Sorry to cut you off, man. Keep going.
No. But it's just, I think you can get so much more out of saying, you know, just taking a deep breath and asking them about it, trying to find out why they and how they came to that position, why and how questions are so important, and why and how questions always elicit a lengthier and richer response. You know, why did someone believe that? And they go, well, I just believe it because what you guys have to say is stupid. And it's like, okay, well, like, ask them why they came to think that. They don't just naturally think that. They didn't just have that idea out of nowhere. They're not born with that idea. Ideas are given to us. That's what culture is. So eventually, if you talk to someone enough and kind of almost like perform the dance of a conversation, you can get to a place where you can start to understand who they are and why they believe the things that they do. And inevitably, and not always, but inevitably, most cases, 9 times out of 10, you realize that you have something in common with them. That you're dealing with the same pressures, you're living under the similar structures, or you have the same concerns and worries, but they've just been couched in different ideas, in different political positions, or they might have been pulled to a different political position than you were at some point in their lives because of their father, or whatever it might have been. And then you have a place of understanding. Then you can actually have a conversation. And that's when you're most likely to create some kind of change. Either, I mean, you might not change their political position or their worldview, but, you know, you might just make them realize that the opposite side of the spectrum is not as bad as they thought it was, or you might realize that. So
yeah, I reckon the approach of curiosity rather than defense it's like, for selfish reasons, it sounds like a far more appealing way to go into a conversation, because I guess it's probably harder to get you back up when you're curious about a person's belief rather than trying to defend your own. Like the idea of going into it like it's a sword fight is like you've got a little bit to lose in that situation, but the idea of going into it like you got something to learn, which is honestly, and probably a credit to you, that was part of the reason I wanted to have you on here, because I was like, all right, clearly, like our first good conversation, I just remember being in the middle of the conversation and I was like, man, this guy's asking a lot of questions and he seems real genuine. And I wanted to know what was going on there, because it was like, I'm happy to throw out the polite, hey, how you going? What's going on? Like small talk king. Do you know what I mean? But there's a certain degree of that you can get through until it just gets boring and lame and it's just exhausting. But have you found that, like, the idea of just being curious is, I mean, you're a smart guy. Like, you obviously leave that conversation with more intelligence about where a person sits on a particular view, but also more understanding. And as you said, a realization that a lot of the time there's at least one thing that you might have in common.
Yeah, I think that being curious is, I think it's always going to benefit you in most situations. I mean, they do say that curiosity killed the cat, but I'm not sure where that came from.
He was just unlucky though.
Yeah, exactly. But wanting to learn and being interested in people's lives, It's only benefited me. And I think that that's kind of the shift, well, not necessarily the shift, but something that you can realize is that, and something that anthropology made me appreciate, is that us as people and humans have so much within us that's fascinating. Like, I think I'm just fascinated by people and the way that they engage and the way that they understand the world, and how they conceive of things. So, like with comedians, I'm always curious to find out how they think about comedy, and why they want to do it, and what drives them to do it. So, like with you, you drive quite a far way to get to comedy gigs. And to me, that just stuck in my mind. I remember you had a joke about it, and it stuck in my mind. And I thought, why would someone drive an hour and a half to do a comedy gig? What kind of is motivating them? Well, how do they have the kind of resilience or tenacity to do that week in, week out? And that stuck with me. And I was just curious about it, because I think, the kind of comics journey it's a tough one, and to constantly need to build up the resilience and motivation to kind of stay on the horse. And that's something that I'm curious about. How are other people doing it? How do people mentally kind of stay resilient in the face of a very kind of adverse industry? That's something that I'm interested in anthropologically. That's kind of what my honors was on, is like, what motivates people to be resilient in structures that are very difficult to navigate. So that's why I spoke to you, and that's when I find out even a small detail about someone, like you're a father, you're in your 30s. Okay, well, that must be difficult, like trying to do comedy and be a father and run a family and make money and all that's hard, but it's all so fascinating to me. And I want to find that out. So curiosity, it's kind of the starting point to wanting to really listen to people and really gain something from them. And I love learning from people. In fact, my partner always says that she says that I kind of instead of reading books, I read people.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, I see that already.
I'm a chronic starer. I'm terrible at staring. From a young age, my mom always used to like tell me off for staring at people in shopping centers, and I'm trying to like rein it in a bit.
I've never noticed it for what it's worth. I feel like maybe unless I just appreciate where you're coming from so much, I don't notice it. But I promise to pull you up if I ever notice you staring. But I've never noticed that about you. It's funny though, man. Yeah. People watching is definitely an interesting thing. I enjoy it to hopefully a healthy degree without it becoming creepy. But what you've dipped your toe on the other side of that line a couple of times, have you? Trying to read that person.
No, I've been told off by few grouchy men in Vietnam. It's so for me, when I see people, I'm reading, I'm like analyzing little things about them. Okay, what are they wearing? Who are they with? What kind of conversations are they making? What, how do they move their hands? It's not like a romantic like Sherlock Holmes, like I can figure out their lives. I don't know if my observations are necessarily accurate, but I kind of make up little stories about them, or I put together, a narrative about who they are. And then if I get the opportunity to speak to them, I want to find out. Like, I want to find, okay, well, what is this person about? And so curiosity definitely is a starting point there of learning. Curious people they learn, hopefully. And that is so important now, where there's a perpetual lack of understanding, and we don't have, things like social media don't really have, it's not necessarily the platform, or we don't have a platform really where we can do that. It takes a lot of energy, concerted energy to do that. I mean, I've been caught up in common threads that have gone on for ages, and eventually they become just too exhausting to partake in anymore, because I feel like I'm hitting my head against a brick wall. So to try and create those kind of conversations, that's another whole thing entirely, but you can at least do it in your everyday life when you meet people.
Yeah, man. You were telling me about a guy the other day, and you actually, I think you gave me a book recommendation that I wrote down. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I think it was
Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Amusing Ourselves to Death. Yeah. So was this guy, was the bloke who wrote that? I remember you saying he was a professor or a teacher in New York, if I'm not muddling him up with another recommendation you gave me. Yeah, cool. But was he is he a person in a particular field of anthropology, or is he a lecturer on the subject or the craft of what it is that we're speaking about?
So he is actually a lecturer he was a lecturer in communications, meaning communications, which was my other major when I was an undergraduate. But he doesn't necessarily use that method that I'm talking about. But he does look at humans and human culture, especially political culture. He writes from a kind of what they would call like a techno-determinist perspective. So he's big on tech, like as in not like Silicon Valley tech, but like how technology, and especially media technology, shapes the world, shapes how we relate to each other, shapes how we see the world, shapes how we see ourselves. So yeah, the book that I was telling you about was really him tracking how media, all the way from oral cultures to print media to books, books and then print media, newspapers, and all the way through to television. So he wrote this book in the 80s.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, he wrote this book in the 80s. It's about how those media forms have changed society and what kind of culture we have now, or even political culture. So the title, Amusing Ourselves to Death, is basically, his argument is that television created a world where entertainment has become the kind of the name of the game. As in, and I mean, that's kind of seems obvious or intuitive, like, oh yeah, well, there's plenty of entertainment on television, but it's more about like even politics itself, or even the political sphere, is no longer something that's kind of necessarily taken seriously, but it's just like perpetual entertainment. It's information that it's not vapid, but it doesn't really have any hold on us, like information, say, in an era where books were the main media form. So like when books were the main media form, if you were living in a small town, say like in early settler America, if you heard news that your local mayor was changing the shop times or changing policies to make goods more expensive, people would take that information and actually feel really affected by it, and had some form of or ability to engage with that. And they would, there might be a meeting amongst the town and so on, or people would kick up a fuss. Now, well, this is Neil Postman's argument, is saying that television and also print media presents us information that's not necessarily relevant to our lives anymore, our immediate lives. So you and I might be able to get news from San Francisco, about a juice company that started up. How is that information relevant to us? It's not. We don't. It doesn't affect our lives, and therefore that information is just kind of like it's a filament. It's kind of just engaging us for a short while. It's just entertaining us. And he goes more into like kind of the structure of television and how they used to have to fill certain time slots. There was advertisements between the time slots, and you had to make it kind of eye-catching and engaging. And he says like that kind of brought about a period of presidents no longer being judged on their ability to articulate themselves and speak rationally about their policies and provide a coherent and complex view of their plan to lead the country. It was more about, who could be most convincing on screen. So like, for example, Ronald Reagan, I think it was an actor.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't acting as a president, but he was an actor before he became president. So his kind of personality suited the medium of television, or the media of television. And Neil Postman's argument is that, at least in his day, and I think now you could say it as well, it's just becoming the name of the game, that media forms like television have produced or lent itself to this kind of entertainment-driven culture where politics is kind of who can be the biggest and the best and the most convincing and the most charismatic president, rather than the most intellectually sound, the most empathetic, the most rational. That's what that book's about.
That's an interesting point. It's an interesting point, the idea of like entertainment and just eye-catching sort of attributes or qualities being the factor that draw a lot of people in. And I was never interested. Like, you could have asked me anything about American politics in 2015, the day before Trump was elected, and I would have had no idea. And then I think just due to absolute shock that he was elected, because I'd just been told by every media outlet that it wasn't going to happen, I just got fascinated. I always say that, to me, like, Donald Trump's the Conor McGregor of American politics. Like, I have no real interest in UFC. Like, I'm not that interested in, but I see Conor McGregor wearing like a massive thick pea coat and just talking smack, and I go, okay, I have to watch. Like, I've got to
you have to watch it.
Really, which is a really interesting. Yeah,
it's tantalizing. And that's, I think, especially now, like, people often talk about this, like how fast moving our media is, how quickly you can sift through posts and videos, and the user has control over how they consume media to some degree, more so than television. I mean, television, you could flick through a few channels, but social media it's user controlled. So if you can't keep a user looking at your content for X amount of time, you're in trouble. And that's, I think, like those big personalities like Conor McGregor. I mean, same as me. When Conor McGregor came to prominence, I was living in South Africa. Like, I wasn't even in the same country, but we both knew about him. Friends of mine thought he was great. They loved him. Suddenly interested in boxing, getting boxing gloves. I mean, I know he does UFC, but like, and that's, those kind of personalities sell. So, but no one really knows what Conor McGregor is actually like as a person. We've seen a whole bunch of mediated images about him. I know there's like a documentary, and he's talking about like, how it was so hard growing up in Ireland, and like he had that kind of like beast mentality of fighting through, and he's always motivated, kept his eye on the target, and so on. But that's all we've got of him. It's just mediated segments or videos or images, and he's created a persona. There's definitely a full team behind him. There's a PR team behind him. Like someone like Barack Obama, for example, when he came into presidency in the White House, he increased the PR team of the White House, like his campaign, by a few hundred people. Like he employed 200 new PR specialists. And if you think about Barack Obama, when you think of the charming smile and the jokes, the humor, but I mean, he had terrible immigration policies. He condoned the bombing of Yemen. When he came into presidency, he was the one that really signed the papers to bail out the bankers at the fall of Wall Street. So there's a lot of policies with Barack Obama, and likewise with Donald Trump, and likewise with, Hillary Clinton sold arms to Saudi Arabia for ages that were used in Afghanistan, that were arms that were used by the Taliban in Afghanistan.
People get angry when you try and talk about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, but this is kind of stuff that Julian Assange revealed, and that's why he's in big trouble now, the Australian journalist. All the American presidents and the Australian presidents, they've put through so many terrible policies. Recently, the Australian government put through a policy where they've changed it so that now that they can keep asylum seekers on Manus Island indefinitely. They have the power to keep them detained there indefinitely. They don't even have to tell them when they're going to be released. Imagine being detained on an island and you don't know when you're going to leave. You have no sense of the future. You have no sense of when you're going to get out. Those kind of policies are all swept under the rug, and all kind of, this is all very complex, and I'm sounding kind of conspiratorial now, but the president's personas and the kind of images that we see of them are different to the reality of their policies. So, and that media does have a role to play in that. The kind of forms that we have, like social media, needs to be attention grabbing. It needs to be able to consume quickly, all lend itself to that kind of political world. And it's the same what we're saying with conversations where you can have open discussions. I'm sure that there are, so on Reddit or other online forums or Facebook groups, so you can have a discussion with someone about a political issue. But to really, you really need institutions created that facilitate that really create an adequate space for people to reach a place of understanding. And this is fairly commonly spoken about, but social media platforms produce the kind of political polarization and misunderstanding that's happening these days, or at least exacerbate it. I think that those political disparities have always been there, but they've just been kind of supercharged.
Yeah, it's really interesting, man. There's a lot there. I swear we could literally, I could talk to you for another 3 hours, and I'm sure we'd have plenty more to talk about. But I've got in the back of my mind, I told you we'd talk for an hour, and been gone an hour 15, and my wife's out shopping with my little man at the moment, so I know she'll be knocking at the door soon. So maybe we'll end round one there, but would love to touch base again. Obviously, I'll see you out and about, but if you're ever keen to do a round two and you sort of dig a little deeper, man, I'd love to do it. Maybe I could we'll plan a time where I don't have a cut off. we can talk for a couple of hours, but dude, as always, great to sit down and chat with you, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no problem at all. It was great to come on and chat. Thanks for
Awesome,
reaching
brother.
out to me.
We'll leave it there.